In the oldest corners of the Savannah, where the sun scorches the earth and the dust carries whispers older than memory, a name lingers like a shadow cast across generations. Notch. He was not merely a lion. He was a presence, an unyielding force. That seemed less like a creature of flesh and more like the will of the land made real. Where he walked, others moved aside. Where he roared, silence followed. Notch did not ask for respect. He demanded it. And he did not lead by charm or kinship, but by a raw authority that needed no explanation. No one could say exactly when he rose. He did not emerge in a blaze of conquest. He was simply there, suddenly, unmistakably, at the center of everything. His mane, blackened and torn, became a banner in the wind. His scars, maps of battles won and survived. His gaze, a weight felt even from a distance. Others ruled in cycles, rising and falling like the rains. Notch endured. Season after season, drought after flood, his figure remained on the ridges and riverbeds, an immovable monument to dominance. Lions came and went, coalitions formed and vanished. But Notch remained, until even time seemed hesitant to challenge him. His legend grew not from stories told, but from silence kept. Those who encountered him rarely spoke of it, as though to say his name aloud was to invite him near. He was not feared like a predator. He was feared like a curse. But every shadow has an end, and in the footprints left by Notch, 5 sons followed, each born not merely of his blood, but of the myth that surrounded him. Their story would not begin with hope. It would begin with inheritance. Before he was feared, Notch was unknown. He began like so many others, young, lean, nameless, a lion with no land, no following, and no legacy. He roamed the outer edges of established territories, scavenging what others left behind, avoiding the eyes of dominant males, always one mistake away from death. But unlike others, he did not scatter at the scent of danger. He observed, he learned, he grew slowly, deliberately. Fights were avoided until they could be won. His survival was not luck, it was calculation. When he challenged his first rival, it was not out of desperation, but opportunity. The male was old, his coalition weakened. Notch struck with brutal efficiency. When it was done, he didn't roar, he didn't celebrate. He simply stayed. If you're enjoying the story, hit the like button and leave a comment sharing what has impressed you the most so far. Your support helps this content reach more people who love wildlife. This was the first step towards something larger. Notch began to claim territory. Not the lushest or safest, but the ones on the fringe, the ones no one else wanted. There, in the margins, he built strength. He began to attract lionesses. At first they came out of necessity, then loyalty. His presence was not affectionate, but it was certain. He protected what was his with ferocity, and he never ran. As his name spread, challenges came. Some were younger, some stronger. All fell. Notch did not fight to impress. He fought to end. Every battle left him more marked, more ragged, but more complete. With each wound, his reputation grew. Then came the moment that defined him. 5 sons were born. To him, not in the same pride, not even in the same year, but each one unmistakably his. As they matured, they began to linger near him. Other males would have driven them off. Notch did not. He let them grow. He let them watch. When they were ready, he moved with them. Together they formed a coalition unlike anything the Maasai Mara had seen. 6 males moving with coordinated power, claiming pride after pride, crushing resistance not through brute force alone, but with strategy and overwhelming presence. They did not scatter after mating. They remained. They ruled. Notch was no longer a wandering survivor. He was now a founder, an architect of a new order. And yet in every movement, in every conquest, there remained something cold. He was not building for legacy. He was building to endure. They were not born kings. They were born heirs to a storm. Notch's sons came into the world scattered across different prides, but fate drew them together. Each one bore his imprint, not only in blood, but in the shape of their eyes, the heaviness of their stride, the silence before they struck. There were 5 in total, each with his own rhythm, but all orbiting the same center, the figure of a father who had never needed to speak to be understood. They were raised by lionesses, but made by the wild. From early days they knew the meaning of hunger, the weight of failure, the instinct to kill or be killed. The Savannah did not coddle them, it tested them, marked them, sharpened them. By the time they approached maturity, their bond was not one of affection but of mutual survival. No fights to the death erupted between them, not because there was love, but because there was order. An invisible, unspoken order passed down through the way Notch looked at them, or refused to look at them. When they began to hunt together, the plains changed. They moved in unison, not as a scattered group of nomads, but as a single, unified force. They learned to flank buffalo herds, to drive wildebeest into traps of their own design. When night fell, their silhouettes stalked the shadows like ancient spirits. No territory was safe. Then they began to conquer. One by one, pride males were challenged and defeated. The sons did not roar when victorious. They marked the land and moved on. The prides that once trembled before Notch alone now bowed before 6 lions, Notch and his 5 sons, an empire of muscle and instinct. In their wake, silence followed. No rival dared approach. Lionesses submitted without struggle. Cubs not of their blood were slaughtered without hesitation. This was not cruelty, it was rule. What set this coalition apart was not only strength, but stability. Other groups collapsed from within. Jealousy, dominance, betrayal. Notch's sons maintained the structure, the discipline, the unspoken law of their father's eyes. He walked among them, but he did not command. He guided by presence alone. In the heart of the Maasai Mara, they became legend. No other male coalition had claimed so many prides at once. No group had held so much land. The balance of power had shifted. Rangers spoke their names, guides pointed out their trails. Documentarians followed their hunts. The Notch dynasty, as it came to be called, was not built on kindness or vision, but on unity in purpose and the cold clarity of dominance. It was not affection that held them together. It was the inheritance of fear. For a time, the land bent beneath their weight. Notch and his 5 sons moved like a tide across the Maasai Mara. From ridge to riverbank, they ruled with unquestioned authority. No rival coalitions dared challenge them. No rogue males approached. They controlled not one pride, but many, scattered across vast distances, yet connected by a silent grip. Each son took his place. Some guarded the borders, others patrolled the heartland. They rotated, replaced each other, filled every void. When one rested, another watched. Their system was not perfect, but it was efficient, refined by instinct and maintained by presence. Their power did not rely solely on fear. It was also recognition. The lionesses understood the value of protection, and in return they submitted. Cubs born during this reign carried the blood of the dynasty. Prey herds shifted their migration paths to avoid the lions' expanding range. The landscape itself seemed to move in response to them. Notch, now older, no longer led charges, but he remained visible. His body, worn and heavy with scars, was a living banner, a reminder of where it all began. When he sat beneath the acacia trees, flies circling his face, even the wind seemed to pause. The sons never challenged him. They didn't need to. His presence was their compass. In this age of dominance, there was no single challenge, no looming enemy. Their strength created its own stability. Days passed without conflict. Nights passed without fear. Other lions vanished into the periphery, and that was the beginning of the problem. In silence, complacency took root. Without challenge, alertness dulled. Without loss, arrogance grew. They did not see it yet, but time, which had once built their strength, now prepared to test it. The dynasty stood tall, revered, and untouchable. But nothing in the wild stays untouched forever. The decline did not begin with a roar. It began with silence, small absences, minor delays, instincts ignored. One son, emboldened by success, began to drift farther from the others. He lingered too long with a pride, marking it as his own. Another, jealous of this attention, began shadowing him, challenging his dominance in subtle gestures. A stare held too long, a kill not shared, a mating interrupted. These weren't open fights, not yet, but they were shifts, grains of sand, slipping beneath a great structure. Then came the real losses. A pride on the eastern fringe fell to an invading coalition, not because the sons were weak, but because they were not there. Their perfect rotation had frayed. Boundaries went unguarded, rivals sensed it. The attack was swift, cubs were slaughtered, lionesses fled, and when the sons returned, the ground was already soaked in silence. It wasn't just territory that was lost, it was reputation. The myth of invincibility had cracked. Inside the coalition, tension deepened. The unity once held by the gravity of Notch's presence now trembled. His sons were growing older, more territorial. Their scars multiplied. And though they still walked together at times, their formation had changed, less fluid, more watchful. There was less trust, less room. One night, two brothers vanished for days. When they returned, they brought injuries they would not explain. Notch watched, but said nothing. He was aging fast. His body, once solid and brutal, had thinned. His breath grew heavier, his steps slower. He still walked among them, but with the quiet of someone fading. The dynasty he built remained strong in shape, but hollowed in spirit. The prey herds noticed. Lionesses noticed. So did enemies. Whispers spread of new coalitions gathering strength. Young males born during the early reign now returned, hardened, vengeful. The sons of Notch were no longer feared without question. They were targets now, measured, calculated, and soon hunted. Within the dynasty, lines were being drawn. One son, the most dominant, began moving separately, building his own rhythm. Another, quieter but colder, began spending more time in isolation, watching both brothers and enemies alike. The youngest, still loyal, tried to keep the rhythm alive, but he was no longer followed. The kingdom had not fallen, but it had fractured. And in the wild, cracks do not wait long before becoming breaks. The sons of Notch had inherited their father's empire. But now, each of them wondered, consciously or not, if they still wanted to share it. Notch did not die in battle. There was no final roar, no glorious stand against a rival. His end came slowly, the way mountains erode, not with thunder but with time. His body, once a map of conquest, became frail. His mane, once black and thick like nightfall, thinned under the sun. The sons who once walked in his shadow now outpaced him, sometimes forgetting to look back. The lion who had shaped their world had become a relic within it. He stopped moving with the group. At first they waited. Then they simply didn't. He began to sleep longer. Hunts passed without him. Borders changed, and he didn't notice. For a while he lingered in the territory's heart, resting beneath the same trees where he once ruled. Occasionally he would rise, take a few slow steps, and stop, looking toward the horizon as if searching for something lost long ago. No, Lion challenged him. They didn't need to. The wild had already begun to reclaim what it once feared. One morning he didn't rise. His body was found by vultures first. Then hyenas came, cautious, circling the still figure that had once driven them into panic. But there was no response, no growl, only silence. His sons never returned to the body. They were not ungrateful. But they had become what he taught them to be, survivors. And survivors do not mourn. With Notch's death, something unseen broke. Not just the unity he enforced, but the weight of his myth. The center was gone. What remained was motion without meaning. The lion who once made the Mara tremble had disappeared into the earth, unnoticed and unremembered by the land he ruled. The legend had ended, and the dynasty left to itself began to drift into its own undoing. Without Notch, there was no center, only orbiting bodies pulled by instinct and memory. The sons, once a single unit of coordinated strength, became fragments. Their movements grew unpredictable. They no longer rotated through territory. They claimed pieces of it. They no longer deferred to each other. They tested one another. What had been order became competition, quiet at first, then violent. The dominant son, bold and territorial, began marking specific boundaries. He claimed a pride as his own, returning to it more frequently, roaring longer, louder. His presence became fixed, no longer flowing with the rest. To him, the coalition had served its purpose. Now, it was time to rule alone. Another son, equally strong but more calculating, saw this as betrayal. He began to follow from a distance, waiting for signs of weakness. When they met, tension clung to the air. They growled, postured, circled. No full fight, yet. But the hierarchy had shattered. The younger brothers fractured under the weight of this conflict. Some remained loyal to the ideal of the coalition. Others aligned with strength, choosing sides not based on blood, but survival. What once had been 6 lions moving like one was now scattered claims, overlapping roars and inevitable violence. The fights began. They were quick, brutal, without warning. Not to kill, but to send messages. Scratches became wounds. Wounds became scars. The land that once thrived under shared rule was now carved into contested pieces. Lionesses grew nervous. Cubs were abandoned. Hunts were missed. The dynasty was no longer feared. It was falling apart in full view. And beyond their fractured territory, the real threat approached. Younger coalitions, lean and hungry, watched the collapse. They heard the roars, they smelled the blood. They moved slowly at first, then with purpose. The dynasty that once dominated the Mara had become vulnerable, its unity broken, its lions isolated, its future unwritten. The sons of Notch, once brothers in legacy, were now enemies in ambition. And in the Savannah, ambition without unity is a death sentence. The last of Notch's sons did not fall in a grand battle. They disappeared, one by one, swallowed by the same land they once ruled. Some were driven out by rivals, defeated, limping into exile, never to be seen again. Others fell to injuries that festered, wounds left untreated by a life now lived alone. A few simply vanished into the brush, too weak to keep up, too proud to beg for alliance. The Mara did not pause for their passing. The herd still migrated. The hyenas still laughed at dusk. And new lions came, young, strong, merciless. They filled the vacuum with fresh blood and untested fury. Where the dynasty once stood, new names took root. Guides who once whispered. Stories of Notch and his sons began pointing elsewhere. Tracks faded, roars changed. Memory became myth. One son was seen limping alone near the Talek River, ribs showing, mane patchy and eyes dim. Days later, only vultures circled that place. Another was chased across open plains by a coalition half his age, his body never found, but his defeat certain. There were no markers, no bones collected, only fading signs in the dust. The last roared once into the wind before disappearing, into tall grass that did not move again. And so it ended, not with legacy secured, not with lineage continued, but with erasure. The sons of Notch, born of fear and forged in power, could not survive the void their father left behind. They inherited dominance but not durability. They carried his name but not his discipline. A dynasty had risen in silence. And in silence it was buried. No bloodline lasts forever. The Mara forgets quickly. Rain smooths out paw prints. Grass grows where blood was spilled. Bones crumble and scatter, swallowed by the earth. Even roars, once thunderous, are replaced by new voices, new challengers, new kings. But some names remain, not because they are spoken, but because the silence around them feels heavier. Notch is one of those names. He left no monuments. No bloodline that endured. But for a time he bent the wild to his will. For a time he was not just a lion, but a force. And through him, 5 sons rose and ruled as one. Together, they formed something rare, something feared. But fear fades. Power shifts, and the wild, ever-hungry reclaims all things. Today, tourists may still hear his story, half-remembered, reshaped by time. Guides might gesture toward distant hills and say, this was Notch's land. But few remember his face. Fewer still remember his sons. They are echoes now, faint, distorted, fading into the dust. And yet every so often, when a lone male lion stands against impossible odds, when a coalition forms with unshakable force, when dominance echoes without mercy, something old stirs. In the soil, Notch is gone. But in the language of survival, in the code written in claw marks and broken branches, his story endures. Not as a blueprint. Not as a lesson, as a warning, because the wild does not honor bloodlines. It honors only the moment and devours all who linger too long beneath their own legend. And so the dynasty ends, nameless in the wind, its crown returned to the dirt, its legacy scattered across the plains like ash. A name once roared, now written in dust,